The book of Colossians is a short book, and one of Paul's great books. Paul has written or wrote very many letters in the New Testament, more than half of the New Testament, for that matter, or half of it. And he writes this book during his first imprisonment. Paul was imprisoned a couple of times, and he was not imprisoned because he was a criminal. He was in prison because he believed in Jesus Christ. He was in prison because when he encountered Jesus Christ on his way to Damascus, his life was transformed. And as a result of his life being transformed, he changed from the person who was persecuting the church of Christ to a person who was preaching this same Christ that he was persecuting. We all know his story because we are going through a series in the book of Acts, where we see how Paul was converted. He was initially called Saul. And since he was a well-studied person, Paul endeavored to write to churches that he had established. Some of these churches he had preached to these people. Like, for example, this letter of Colossians, he had written to the saints who were in Colossae, which was a city in Asia. And Paul is writing, and this church was planted by one of his disciples. The most likely planter of this church was a guy by the name Epaphras, who Paul mentions in the book of Colossians chapter 1 verse 7. You can check in at some time and see that that was the guy who planted this church. That was the guy who planted this church, Epaphras. It is in Colossians 1:7. And the purpose of Paul writing these letters, sometimes we like to read the Bible just like a book that is shallow enough to make us moral. You know, if you want to be a good person, go and get the Bible and read. Sometimes we read the Bible that way. But the Bible was not just written to make us moral. There is a context. There is a reason why it was written. For you to understand the things that have been written in it, you have to understand the underlying situations of what was happening. What was happening? What words led, what circumstances led to the writing of whatever people wrote. That way, you will understand very well, and you'll be able to be a good interpreter of scriptures, because everything is done within a certain context. And so, he writes this letter, and the purpose or the reason why he's writing this letter to these people, he is writing to refute some teachings that were heretical. He is writing to correct some teachings. There were some teachings that were going on in Colossae, in this province in Asia Minor, that were not the true teachings of Jesus Christ, but they were quoted as the teachings of Christ, and so he is writing to refute these teachings. Second reason why he is writing this letter is to exalt the supremacy of and sufficiency of Christ. He is writing to tell these people that now that you have received Christ, he is enough. You don't need Christ plus my religion. You don't need Christ plus my things. You only need Christ and him alone. And so he is writing to say that Christ is sufficient. The work that he did on the cross is enough, or was enough. And now you can believe in him and put your hope in him. And as a result of putting your hope in him, then you are going to dwell with him forever and ever, because that is the hope of every Christian. The final reason why he is writing this letter is to encourage believers to continue in faithful Christian living, grounded in their union with Christ. He is encouraging them to continue living faithfully. We as Christians need constant reminder to live faithfully. Why? Because we are always forgetful. We are always forgetful. We always forget. We sometimes neglect the things that God has done for us, and we focus on other things. And especially when life is comfortable. When life is comfortable, we tend to forget a lot about God. When things are going on well, we tend so much to focus on our own strength. We sometimes forget where God has taken us from, and we imagine that it is because of our minds. We imagine it is because of our wisdom. We imagine it is because of where we come from. We imagine it is because of the things we have done. And that is why we constantly come to church on Sunday. We constantly come to church on Sunday because we are forgetful people, and we ought to be reminded. We remind ourselves every time of who Christ is. We remind ourselves because in the course of the week, we might forget who God is. And it is very human to forget, because if you want to know it is very human to forget, you look at the children of Israel. They saw miracles happen, great things happen right in front of their very own eyes. And Paul is saying in the previous chapter 2, that these things are not meaningful. That Christ himself is, you eat whatever you want to eat. You just know that Christ is sufficient. Whatever you want to drink, you drink whatever you want to drink. Just know that Christ is sufficient. The festivals and circumcision, there were people who were saying that if you're not circumcised, you're not a believer. And Paul was coming to tell them, no, that is not true. Christ is the only sufficient person. The other heresy he was correcting was something called mysticism. Wale watu wanapenda kuona mashetani kila mahali. Kila mahali ni mashetani. Ukieka color black ni shetani. Ukieka hii red ni shetani. Ukifanya hivi ni shetani. So that was a teaching in Colossae. They would see demons. And sometimes we give a lot of attention to the devil. He does not need that much attention. We know he exists. We know he's powerful. We know he is a foe to the forces of God. But our focus must be on God, not the devil. So there were people who focused on visions and worship of angels. You can imagine we come here in a service, and sometimes I talked to one person sometimes back. Na huyu jamaa alikuwa anapenda kuota. It was a lady. Alikuwa anaota some strange stuff. And so she tried to ask me what they mean. You know, I'm not an interpreter of dreams. I don't know how to interpret. So when they came to my office at that particular time, and they asked me, what does this dream mean? Because I had some radio program that was saying, if you dream these things, this is what it means. And dreams are sometimes dreams. And I asked her, what kind of movies do you watch? And this lady watches horror movies. Why will you not dream of horror things if those are the things that you are watching? Sometimes it's just a continuation of the things that we interact with. If you keep interacting with rainbows and puppies, you will dream about rainbows and puppies. So sometimes they don't mean anything. You will be told that if you dream with an eagle, it's like your destiny is being taken. If you are dreaming with water, those are marine spirits. No. Jesus Christ is enough. Forget about marine spirits, even if they exist. What business do I have to do with marine spirits? What business do I have to do with the devil? None whatsoever, isn't it? We focus on Christ. The other one was something we call, the other thing he was correcting is something we call asceticism. Asceticism is the harsh treatment of the body as a way to appear spiritual. During the time in Easter, there are some people in Philippines who crucify themselves. They beat their bodies, wanachukua whips, and they punish their bodies as a means of righteousness. As you're punishing your body, you think that God is there looking at you and he's saying, Trevor is suffering so much for my sake. He must be in my kingdom. Do you think God is bothered if you beat your body as a means of righteousness? So Paul is going to tell these people, stop hurting your body. You need this body healthy. You need this body well for you to be able to serve God. Stop beating it as a means of righteousness, because that is not going to make you righteous. Christ is sufficient. He's telling them this thing. And finally, he's going to correct another myth or another false teaching of Greek philosophy. There were the Greeks who were learned. They were learned people. They loved their education. They loved their books. And some of them would teach ideas that they would equate this knowledge with righteousness. That the more you know, because Gnostics means that, the more you know, the more righteous you are. So they will look for very strange things. Sometimes things happen to us in our lives not because of spiritual things. Not everything is a spiritual matter. We are spiritual beings, and we need to worship God in truth and in spirit, and we need to walk in spirit, but not everything that happens to us is spiritual. If you steal and you are fired from your job, it is not spiritual. It's not a spiritual issue. It is an issue of discipline. You're just being disciplined. It is not that the devil is coming after you. Sometimes you have done something that requires punishment. And that is what Paul is telling these people. And he emphasizes certain things. He emphasizes that Christ is supreme. He is telling these people that your focus has to be on Christ. He is telling them that you have to be united with Christ in this book. He is telling them that Christ is enough for salvation and that sanctification is progressive. By the way, sanctification is the process where we are continually made into Christ's likeness. When all is said and done, a sanctified Christian will be like Christ, because that is heaven's agenda for human beings. That when all is said and done, we will be like him. We will struggle in this world with sin. We will struggle in this world with so many things. But when all is said and done, we will be like who? We will be like Christ. That is heaven's agenda. And sanctification is the process ya kufinyangwa, is the process ya kufananishwa na yeye. It is the process of being made into the likeness of Christ. Sometimes we struggle with pride. Sanctification is when we continually struggle less with pride. We struggle with anger. Sanctification process makes us be continually patient. We struggle with so many things in life. Sanctification is a process where we are continually made into the likeness of Christ. And when sanctification is complete, we will be completely and utterly like Jesus Christ and dwell with him forever and ever in heaven. That is heaven's agenda for every Christian. If you want to know what the will of God is in your life, the Bible tells us in the book of Thessalonians, and this is the will of God, that you may be sanctified, that we may be holy, that we may be separate from the world. That is the will of God in our lives. That's what Paul is telling them. This is the sum total of the entire book of Colossians, the 4 chapters. Now, sasa ndio nimeanza sermon. Nimemalizana na zile vitu nilikuwa nataka kusema. Sasa ndio nimeanza sermon. Now, I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to talk about being lifted with Christ. That is in verse 1.